Hey, Erynn.
Hi.
I want to play a game.
Not even close.
Oh, hi, everyone. Welcome back
Hi.
to Gentlemen Prefer Cinephiles, a movie podcast. I'm Charlie Moore.
I'm Erynn.
She's real cute.
So is Charlie.
Anyway, today we're talking about the movie Funny Games.
Haha.
Which is actually two movies, neither of which are particularly funny or playful.
Yeah, you're right.
They're both directed and written by Michael. Let me just give me a second.
Minel.
The company that we pay gas to.
They were both written and directed by Michael Haneke.
The Austrian filmmaker.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. So we're going to be talking about the main plot because they are practically identical in plot structure.
It's true. One is meant as a remake of the other.
Yes.
So there's Funny Games in 1997, which is an Austrian film that kind of is like this meta commentary on violence. Then there's the 2007 Funny Games, which was did I say that right? Yeah, 2007. Yeah, the 2007 Funny Games is meant to. It was remade for American audiences.
Yeah.
In English, and it's pretty much a shot-for-shot remake.
Haneke made the first one thinking that it would have crossover appeal with America because he wanted to make a statement about violence and stuff like that. But it did not work in America. It did not do very well, even though he won awards for it at Cannes, I think.
Well, yeah. The main reason he remade it in 2007 was because he wanted to have an English remake so that people wouldn't have a reason to not watch it.
Yeah, but then it also didn't do.
It also didn't do that well because a lot of people misunderstood it.
This is just like what we were talking about people not watching movies right.
Yeah, for the last episode, yeah.
And now we will begin.
Great. I'm going to give like a quick rundown of Austrian cinema in like 60 seconds or less.
And she's perfect and beautiful, and she's a German
Stop
minor.
now. So, part of Funny Games and why it's so great is its kind of place in the timeline of Austrian cinema. So, in general, until recently, Austria was never really considered a film nation because it existed as this melting pot with no real national core for a really long time. So on top of that, there wasn't really a youth group that challenged a lot of traditional cinema and created a new wave, kind of like Italy and France. So during World War II, Austria lost a lot of its filmmakers to Hollywood, including people like Billy Wilder and Fritz Lang. You might have heard of them. So from there, in the 40s and 50s, Austrian film kind of emulated the Hollywood studio system that was in place. And that style kind of continued through the 40s and 50s into the 60s. But the 60s, you kind of see a little bit of a shift. The late 60s, there was this large movement called the Viennese Actionism, and it's a mix of performance art and film, and it's like Gunter Bruce and Otto Mühl. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. I'm so sorry.
Self-mutilation.
Yeah, they're really, really intense films. You can watch 8-64 Anna or 10-65 Self-Mutilation. It was kind of this extreme reaction to Austria's relationship to World War II and how Austria hadn't really dealt with its ties to World War II up until that point. So you also see in Germany New German cinema, but it kind of fails because it's trying to emulate Italian neorealism. And then the Berlin School came, and then we're kind of launched into this period now with Haneke where he's creating cinema that's counter to the traditional Austrian cinema. So that's kind of where Funny Games is falling. It's a reaction on it's a commentary on the passive violence that we see in a lot of film culture. Yeah, does that make sense? Is that cool?
Yes.
Was that a good rundown? Do you have any questions, Charlie?
Man, you're so smart.
Oh my gosh, stop.
So, the films begin with a simple little car ride through
Really
the
quick,
countryside.
there will be spoilers from this point on.
Oh yeah, definitely go watch the movie first, at least the Austrian one. Go see it. Go see both of them if you want, but you do not want it to be spoiled for you.
Yes, the Austrian one is on Filmstruck though, if you have it.
Yeah, if you got Filmstruck or you got it, go get it from a library or Netflix,
Yeah.
DVD service.
Yeah.
You could get it. You get an illegal copy. I don't care. Just go, watch it.
So yeah, this is going to be a little bit more in depth than like things like our Phantom Thread and Shape of Water, because those we just kind of hit general points. But this one we're going to go pretty much plot point by plot point and talk about the differences between the two, kind of what it's hitting on and all that type of stuff.
So it's a little bit more like our Room.
Yeah, it's a lot more like the Room podcast. Yeah,
you can listen to right now with
you
our
can listen to
friend
right now.
Brent.
Blah, 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 blah.
So the films begin with a simple car ride through the countryside. They're listening to opera and guessing who the opera writer is.
Ooh, fancy man.
Upper middle class family.
Are you okay? You're tearing up a lot.
No, I've just been doing it all day.
Are you gonna cry?
No, don't worry.
Okay.
Don't point it out. It's just
For those who can't see, he's crying.
Well, we're gonna.
My intro to Austrian
out.
cinema was so good. He's crying.
Let's cut that whole thing out.
I love you so much, Charlie.
But we'll keep in the
Don't
foppish
cry.
British accent, though.
Yes.
Okay. And they're guessing what the song is and who it's by. Ooh. But then.
Is another really interesting thing when you look at Austrian cinema, because Austrian cinema just really embraced opera, and it became like Austrian cinema became almost a shadow of what other people expected it to be, so it really indulged in like heavy operatic thrillers, I suppose. That might not be the right word. Like opera, romantic comedies, like in back in
Alpine villages in the past.
That's the Heimat film. That's German. That's
Lederhosen.
This is German.
Germans.
So the opera is just suddenly replaced, I suppose, by scream metal, like a hard cut.
Super hard into just scream metal playing, and it's non-diegetic. The family is very calm.
You're still listening to opera.
It implies that they don't understand what's going to happen to them. Very, very brutal scream metal song. Big red text shows up on the screen with the credits and everything.
Yes.
And then they arrive.
And then they arrive and they see their neighbors.
They see their neighbors and they're like, hey, we're going to go golfing later, right? And they're just like, in the distance, like, hey.
Here's what I found on the web.
Siri trying to butt in. You can butt in when I ask you. So they see their neighbors.
And their neighbors are acting just really uncomfortable and awkward.
There's these two strapping young men in white that are there.
But you don't notice at that point that they're...
It just kind of looks like a crowd.
Yeah, it just kind of looks like a crowd of people doing stuff. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. And then they're like, will you help us with our boat?
They're like, well, see you later. And you're just like, they drive around and they're like, that was weird.
You're just like, that was really uncomfortable. And at this point, both of the films are pretty much the same at this point.
Oh, yeah.
Like, the acting is really similar. Like,
I would
everything's
say
pretty...
they're all the plot points are exactly the same in the same order. It's just that some of the reactions that the actors have to each other are different. And that's it.
Yeah.
So, George and his son go out to set up the boat.
So the family is a wife
named
Anna, a husband named George,
and a little
boy named Georgie.
Georgie.
You want a balloon?
So Anna's just in the kitchen she's just preparing the food. She's like, oh, we're here in our vacation house preparing some food.
We're rich people.
Upper class. And then one of the guys from before, one of the young men,
shows up at the house.
He shows up and he's like, hey, my name's Peter.
He's not Irish.
My name's Peter. That's not really an Irish accent, Erynn, you racist.
Anyway, so yeah, his name is Peter, and he shows up and asks to borrow eggs for the neighbor next door.
Yeah, he's like...
And she's like, oh, okay, that's fine.
She's like, okay.
And then at this point, it's really interesting because, I mean, I don't speak German very fluently. I'm pretty much like elementary proficiency at it. So, like, it's fine. But one thing we discussed a lot in our class when we discussed funny games was the Austrian dialect is coded upper class. Like, the young men who enter the situation, Peter being the first one, he speaks as if he's upper class.
They use certain French words in their...
They mix French and German.
So,
but like even like grammatically and everything like that, it's really coded. It's coded upper class.
yes.
Yeah.
So there's no reason to be like, oh, this is weird already.
This is a weird kid coming to my house.
He just kind of looks a little weird, but
they're hitting all the right cultural notes as to where Anna isn't put off.
And she's all like, oh, do you want me to wrap up the eggs or just take them? And he's like, oh, I'll just take them. And then he walks away and then immediately drops the eggs like an idiot. Just like, oh, whoopsie.
Oh, oops, I dropped the eggs. And then so he talks her into giving her more eggs.
Yeah. She's all like, what do you want then? And he's like, just give me 4 more eggs. Because they have a little debate where she's like, we only have 12 eggs. And he's like, oh, you still have 4 afterwards. And then he walks outside and the dog jumps on him, and he drops the eggs.
He drops the eggs again.
And
he's just the worst person ever.
And this time they were even wrapped up, I think.
Forget all the stuff he does later on in the plot. This scene makes him the worst. Just kidding.
But his friend Paul comes up. Peter and Paul, haha. Apostles. So they come inside and he's like, oh, the dog jumped on him. Whoa.
Give us more eggs. So now there's 2 young men in the situation with Anna, and it's at this point where it starts getting really weird. Like, she's obviously uncomfortable. She's obviously getting red flags that things are wrong. But in terms of, yeah, she's just telling him to leave. But in terms of, like, with class and everything, she doesn't, it's still, I don't know, they're able to do these things because they're well-spoken young men who you wouldn't expect anything from unless you have like prior experience,
Well, the thing about upper class society is that it's this very homogenous, put together thing, and whenever there's like a disruption to it, everything falls apart because there's almost nothing that they can do in the actual situation when they don't have protection. It's like the scene in the Blues Brothers where they just go in there and they start causing a ruckus and throwing shrimp around and
it's way better than the Blues Brothers.
Well, the Blues Brothers is great. We're not going to debate about this now, but I'm just saying that it's a similar situation where there's very little structurally that she can do to force them to leave other than just keep telling them to leave, but then they insist that everything is fine and that she's the one that's acting weird, and they come forward and Paul is all like, oh, this is a nice golf club set over here. He's like, hey, let me borrow one of these golf clubs, and he walks outside. He's like, whoa, that's nice. There's the dogs barking on
At this point, it cuts to the husband and the son who are setting up the boat, and then they both decide to go back to the house because they hear something going on with the dog.
They hear the dog stop barking, and they're like, where's the dog?
What's going on? So Anna's like flustered and telling these 2 young men to get out of her house and to stop breaking her eggs. And so then George and Georgie show up, the husband and son, and then she's like, just make these boys leave. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I'm tired of it. I'm over it. And then the husband is just like, well, I don't know. We gotta have them explain what's going on.
She's just like, what? And then she goes and locks herself into a room, and Paul's like, the dog jumped on Peter. Just give us the last eggs. And he's just like,
not Jerry Seinfeld.
And he's like, what? What are you talking about? And he's just like, give us the eggs, dude. And then he just like and then George just slaps him in the face, and he's
no, that's not what happens.
Yeah, it is.
They're talking, and then he's asking for the eggs, and George is just confused and like, what's going on? And then he steps forward, and he kind of breaks the barriers a little bit, and he's like, he says something to George that makes him slap him in the face, like.
Yeah.
But he instigates it, for sure. And then George is like, slaps him in the face and is like, get out of the house. And then he just whacks him with the golf club and breaks his leg.
Pop! Paul just hits George right in the knee, and George goes down, and he's all like, ah!
So like, what's going on? The son is like, what is going on? And then the wife hears everything, and Anna enters the situation, and then he's just like, it's just a lot. And so then the boys, they try and, like, it's really weird. They're like, oh, he's a doctor. Let him help you set your leg. And he's like, no, don't touch me. You just broke my leg. No. And then they force all of them into, no. Anna and Paul go outside to find the dog. And then George and his dad are sitting there.
Yeah.
With Peter?
Yes.
With the terrible person who breaks eggs. So then, at this point, as the audience, you're just really like, what is going on? Because it's such a sudden shift. Like, everything is pretty much fine until it isn't anymore. Would you say that's?
Yeah.
So then Anna and Paul are outside looking for the dog, and he's playing a game of, like, hot and cold with her.
Yeah. Because they're looking for the dog.
Yeah, and he breaks the fourth wall and this, like...
He looks around and winks at the camera.
And you're like, oh, God.
Oh, this is weird. And then eventually she finds the dog in the car, and it just kind of rolls out and ragdolls onto the ground, and it's very upsetting.
Yeah.
And very visceral.
So you find out they've killed the dog.
And then Peter's just, like, sitting back where George is with his leg all wrapped up. And he's got, like, the golf club set on his stomach, and he's got it raised up in the doorway, and he's just kind of, like, teetering on it in the doorway, and it looks very phallic. It's a very strange image where he's basically, it's almost like a taunt to George, whose knee has just been busted. But then they all
Anna sees people on the boat who start to call to her.
Yeah.
And they're like, Anna, hey!
She's like, hi.
And so Anna and Paul go down and talk to her friends that show up on the coastline. Their house is, like, right next to, like, a little lake or whatever.
Yes.
And so, like, they just have a little bit, like, short discussion. Funny note here, in the American version, the person who plays Fred's mom in Fred the movie is the woman.
Yes. She was also in Men in Black as
She's a really good actress. She was on SNL.
Yeah. Anyway.
Sorry. Funny note, I just had to...
Funny games.
Just had to bring it up.
So, everything's kind of weird. Paul comes down and introduces himself, and he's all like, "Oh, I'm just a guy, haha. It's uncomfortable, just like the beginning of the movie. Here we are." And then they leave, and Anna's all like, "Maybe we'll come over."
Maybe we'll come over later. It's pretty much the same situation that happens when, because you realize at this point in the narrative that early on when they pull up and they see the family next to him, and they're like, "Hey, you want to help us with the boat?" at the beginning of the film, and how the family's acting really standoffish. It's pretty much the same exact thing, just now with the actual family that you're watching.
Yeah. So they come back in, and they walk George into the living room where the TV is and all the couches, and the boys are being very kind and cordial, like
we could set your leg.
Peter is standing behind them, and he's all like, "Oh, you should have let me help you carry him in while Anna and Georgie are carrying in George." And then Paul is, like, pushing coffee tables out of the way and setting up the couches for them to sit on. And then they all sit down. Paul and Peter start having this sort of strange conversation with them. They go into everything. Peter is hungry and he keeps wanting to eat. Paul keeps making fun of him for his weight. The family asks them who they are, and Paul goes into the story about how Peter's mother is, like, a prostitute, and then he says, no, it's not true. He's just really poor. No, he's really rich. They go back and forth. It's like, it doesn't matter.
They're pretty much telling their lies about themselves, and it's just... But the main thing to take away from this scene is that they ask the family, like, do you think... Okay, we're going to make a bet. We bet that you're going to be dead by tomorrow morning.
At 9 a.m.
At 9 a.m. And you're going to bet that you're going to be alive. And then the family's just like...
And then Paul looks at the camera again.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
He's all like, phew. And then they start this game. This is the funny games part of the movie.
Yeah, they just kind of go through all of these really... Like... They go through all these really weird, like, situations. It's weird. They make Anna undress just to see if she's fat.
The one that.
And then they're like, okay, she's not. Put your clothes back on.
Before they do that, he's just like, "Hey, little Georgie, come over here. We're gonna play a game called Kitten in a Bag." And he takes off one of the coverings of one of the cushions and just puts the bag over the kid's head, and it's like this really uncomfortable. Everyone's like, "Whoa!" And it's to cover his eyes while they make Anna undress, because he's all like, Peter and Paul kind of make fun of her for her weight because Paul was making fun of Peter for his weight, and they make this bet about if she has jelly rolls and all this stuff, and then she doesn't, and so she can put her slip back on and everything, and then
the son wets himself and then escapes.
Yeah, he like kicks him and runs out. He runs upstairs and then runs off the roof.
Yeah.
And runs into the lake to go around to the other house.
Yeah, so Paul goes to follow him, and then Peter's just watching TV.
Yeah,
at this point.
This is kind of a fourth wall breaking moment where he's flipping through all the channels and the different. It's almost like Shaun of the Dead, where they almost the sentences almost complete each other on the screen and everything like that.
Yeah, and then there's kind of a horror subversion with Paul and George because George, the little kid, goes to the next house to try and find, the little kid goes to the house of the neighbors you meet in the beginning and tries to find them to tell them like something's wrong, but the house is just empty, and he finds them murdered. Doesn't he?
Dead upstairs.
Yeah.
And then he grabs a gun, and there's this it's very much like Halloween or a movie like that where Paul is coming after him. This is the most like intense classic American horror part of the movie.
But I think it's meant to subvert. It's not meant to indulge in that kind of horror imagery.
I feel like the entire movie is about the violence that is happening. It's not indulging in any violence.
Yeah.
It's a meditation on the nature of violence in media.
Yeah.
So Paul starts playing that screamo music from earlier, the scream metal, and then Georgie tries to fire this 2-barreled shotgun at him, but it doesn't fire because it was already used on the family earlier, so it's empty, and then Paul takes it from him and grabs the shells and brings Georgie back to the house.
Yes.
So now they have the gun, and they're about to count off who is going to die first. So they start counting numbers on everybody.
So Paul's like, I'm hungry. I'm going to go to the sandwich. You count off who's going to die first. And so while he's in the kitchen, like, you just hear Paul counting down. Then he's, like, getting stuff for a sandwich.
Yeah.
And he's making a sandwich. Then you hear a gunshot and just screams.
Yeah.
And you don't know who's died. You don't know what's going on. You don't see it by any means. Because that's not the point.
And Haneke draws it out to the point where Paul just keeps making his sandwich and you're just left wondering what happened for like a minute. And then it cuts back and there's just blood on the wall and blood on the TV screen.
And you see Georgie, the little kid, in the corner.
The little kid got killed.
Just the little kid got shot. But then he's like, no, you played the game wrong. You counted wrong. God, you're such an idiot.
And then Paul's like, oh, I'm sorry, we're gonna go.
And then the two parents are just like, their kid just got shot, and they're like, oopsie.
Paul and Peter are just like, oh, sorry. And then they just leave the house and close the door, and then they're gone. And Anna's just sitting there on the ground, all tied up, just sitting there for a while. She waits for a few seconds to see if they're really gone. And then it's just this very painful single shot where she gets herself up off the ground even though she's all tied up, and like fumbles over to get herself free, and then goes to meet her husband again.
Well, she shuts off the TV.
Yeah,
which is covered in blood.
She shuts off the TV and goes over and cuts herself loose in the kitchen and comes back and holds George, and they just have this they just cry, and it's very visceral and real feeling where they're just crying for like a minute because it's so their son just died.
And it's really interesting how Haneke chooses to show like he shows the real horrific things about violence. He doesn't show like the gunshot, you know. He doesn't show the kid getting shot in the face.
There's not like ribbons of gore flying through the air.
Yeah.
It's always very quick, and then the aftermath is the very painful part, like the emotional side of it. So then they you know.
And I want to say really quick, I'm sorry. This is one of the big differences between the 1997 and the 2007 one, because the 1997 cut of the film, I just think, like, I'm gonna make a quick comment about the acting. I think the acting is done a little bit better.
Yes.
It is just, oh my gosh, it's the same man from The Lives of Others, which was an Oscar-winning film.
Best foreign film.
Best foreign film, and he's just it's just amazing. He's just wrecked. Because, I mean, it's Tim Roth and Naomi Watts play the husband and wife in the American version, but it almost works against the film's messages in a way, because playing off of, like, even though they're not necessarily the biggest stars, it's not like having Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie in the roles, but it plays off the star system in a way that comforts the audience and lets the audience have some form of distance. And there's also a little bit of difference, like Naomi Watts' body is shown a lot more, which kind of also like plays in a little bit more to the Hollywood type of thing, which I think works against the film personally. I'm a diehard for the 1997 one, so I mean the 2007 one I think almost is there, but there's certain little things like this scene in particular make it a little bit not as effective for me.
Yes. So
to transition. Sorry about that.
So then...
Actually, I'm not sorry.
So then there's just a whole bit where she gets dressed and she puts George into the chair, and they keep trying to dry the cell phone that was dropped earlier into some water at the beginning.
When he's breaking eggs and he's the worst.
Correct. And then she goes out the window, but not before they have this nice touching moment where you know, they say that they love each other and kiss, and it's this very desperate kind of last time they might get to see each other kind of moment. In the American version, it plays a little bit less in some ways,
which might be a cultural difference in terms of how people react to hard situations in Europe versus America.
Yeah.
But which is something that was touched on a little bit. I'm not 100% certain, because I mean I didn't grow up European. I'm not necessarily exposed to that, but that's just something to note, because I know European. I've discussed this with Austrian people who have said that that's a cultural difference in the acting.
Professor Robert Van Dessel.
That's what I've discussed. Yeah, Professor Robert Van
UCCS,
thank you.
German and film program.
Wow.
He's a wonderful man.
One of the smartest people ever.
He keeps asking to be on the show.
He's going to be on the show one day.
He'll be on the show.
Be excited about it.
You'll be on the show, Robert.
I don't think he's listening.
So Anna goes outside and she's running around. She tries to get the notice of people. She knocks on this gate at the house and nobody comes out. She runs down the street and a car's driving by and she hides. And then once it goes past, she comes back out to try to flag it down, but then it's gone. And then another car is coming out and she decides not to hide this time, but just flag it down. And then
it's just Peter and Paul.
It just cuts to them bringing her back to the house, and you're like, oh my god,
no.
please. Yeah, they explain that they were just giving them a fair chance because it's a fair game, so they get their own chance to go and move after somebody's dead.
Yeah, and this scene that's coming up is one of my favorite scenes in the whole film, because it's so interesting.
It's another really big turning point for it.
Yeah.
So then they play the game where they're going to count off who dies next, and Anna they give Anna a choice where
she gets to either pick who dies first or how George dies.
Yeah, quick or slow.
Yeah.
And all she has to do is recite a prayer, and Paul's like, well, what kind of prayers do you know? And she's
like, I don't know any.
He's like, you don't know any prayers? Peter, what kind of prayer? And Peter's just like, you know, oh God, I pray to thee. This like a really short one, you know.
Yeah.
So, and Paul's like, don't you know any longer ones? And Peter's just like, And Paul is like, oh, fine then, we'll just do that one. But you have to, what does he say? You have to say it backwards.
Yeah.
And so then, while she says it, and then she goes for the gun that's
there's this beat that happens where both of Paul and Peter get distracted for a split second, and then she goes for the double barrel shotgun and then shoots Peter.
Yeah.
And it's the most horrific, like it's the only scene
violence
that really indulges in the violence. Like you see him like get shot, blood everywhere. He hits the wall and then he falls, and then Paul is like, what?
And he's like, I need the remote. He starts digging up.
And then you're just like,
the
the
couch,
remote.
the couch pillows for the remote control.
And then she goes to shoot him, I believe, and then before she can do anything, he hits the rewind button, and then the whole film rewinds.
Yeah.
Up until right before Peter gets shot.
And then she goes for the gun, but this time Paul grabs it and he says, "You cheated. You can't do that." So then
Now you lose the game.
So she has to be punished, so they
Sorry.
she has to be punished, so they shoot George. But that happens off camera.
Yeah.
And they walk down to the boat and they sail off into the river or lake or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And they start talking about like metaphysics and stuff like that. Like Peter's talking about these types of particles, like antimatter particles that exist but don't exist, and all this stuff. And
They're kind of talking about like the balance of the universe.
Yeah,
it's a lot.
and then you see the knife that was there earlier in the movie.
It was dropped while the son and father were putting up stuff.
And Anna sees the knife, but then it's just a red herring, and they pick her up and put her on the edge. And before it's even 9 a.m., Paul just pushes her off the boat, and she falls into the ocean or lake or river or whatever, just to drown. At least, I mean, in the movie they're
literally just like,
drowns.
We're hungry, and then they push her into the thing, and then they're
gonna
like,
go right to the friend's house.
Yeah, and then the film transitions to the scene where she talks to the friends who are on the boat. They go to their house.
But Paul starts talking to Peter about, whether or not reality is real, and he starts talking about, isn't reality just fiction and all this stuff, and Peter doesn't really seem to get it, but it's hinting at the nature of how Paul can look at the camera and knows that they're just a part of the film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then they just go to the other family's house, and Paul asks them if they have any eggs to borrow. And then when she says yes and she leads him into the house, he looks back at the camera, and then the film ends.
Scrape metal plays over the credits.
It's a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece. It's perfect. Watch it.
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. It's great.
So, yeah, as we've discussed a little bit, but we'll just go over to finish this out. The American film suffers a little bit from the tone, because I feel like the actors in the original just had such a great naturalistic way about them. Even the kid is really good in that one.
They're just a lot messier. Like,
if
that makes sense. Like, they indulge a lot more in the raw emotions of the scene. Like, Tim Roth and Naomi Watts, like, I love them both, and I think they're both great actors, but they feel a little bit tightly controlled compared to the German actors, or the Austrian actresses and compared to the other cast. My goodness, sorry. And in addition to that, I think the main acting thing that works against it is the casting with Peter and Paul, because Peter and Paul in the first one, they just look pretty straight edge, and that's fine. I mean, the only reason I felt put off by it is because, like, in my own society, like, those type of men are the ones you look out for. But I mean, there's nothing inherently weird about them. They look like normal men. In the American version, they show up at the house and you're immediately like, no, these guys are creeps. Like, they just, like, they have huge bags under their eyes, and they're like weird. They have weird haircuts.
I will say that the guy who plays Peter in the newer one is good. And the guy who plays Paul, I
love him. He has a great product campaign, but he was not cast well in the role, I don't think.
I just feel like he just comes off so, I don't know. He just seems like he's kind of a little twerp. He doesn't feel like he's got a lot of control over the situation in any way.
And he feels a little sociopathic in, like, a different way that works against the narrative.
Yeah. I don't know. I just feel like he comes off a little bit more stilted than Paul. I find Paul in the original Austrian film to be like a very charming presence, which is what makes him more disturbing in the film. So I would just say the violence is done a little bit weirder in the American one, where there's like some sped up shots that look really wonky.
Well, and like Naomi, like, I mean, the German, or the actress in the original, she's clothed for the most part. She's like a normal looking. She's a normal woman, and so it feels more powerful with the violence. But Naomi Watts, it's star Naomi Watts, and and it distances the audience a little bit. I think it would have been better to go with some more B-movie actors to a larger degree.
I feel like just Don't even remake it. Just try to re-release the original one in America. I think people would get.
But
it
I mean,
more.
people, the Michael Haneke, I think, directly said people don't want to watch it because it's in German. And so he wanted to remove that barrier. So, which I mean is completely understandable, and I'm fine with a remake in terms of that. But just, I think the casting could have been done a little bit different that would have made it more powerful. Fact checker?
Well, I have a question.
What is your question? Come over to the mic.
Oh, well,
The fact checker has a question. Felicity's back.
I wasn't paying attention because I was reading, so my apology if you've already answered this.
She's getting fired. Just kidding.
What does the director say about the new cast?
Michael Haneke? I mean, he obviously approved it.
Well,
like, he's a really tight-knit director.
He directed
yeah,
it.
yeah. He
Well, I was just curious because.
yeah, I'm pretty sure he approved it. I don't know. I think he could have gone a different direction with it, personally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, since you hailed me over here, what did you actually want to know? Because I'm pretty sure you didn't. Know
Oh, no,
if
that
wanted to
was
say
just a
something.
question.
She
No,
saw
I
that you had
did,
your
yeah.
hand raised.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Love you, Felicity.
Alright, bye.
It's amazing. It's so good. Go watch it.
Violence, class, Nazism, it's all in there. It's a great time with great themes, and it's a very well-made movie. It looks great.
Yeah, it looks fantastic.
Like the 1997 one, I feel like hasn't aged a day.
Oh, 100%. And it's really interesting because they used the same house in both of them.
Yes.
They use pretty much the same furniture, same everything. The only thing that's different is like the acting, the actors. Like, that's it. And I mean, it's still powerful. Like, I mean, I completely disagree. Like, a lot of the critics said, well, like, Haneke, he did a really good job, but like, he doesn't really understand like making horror films because like, you know, he should really show the gore and like show the violence. And I'm like, that's completely missing the point and just reaffirming like why the film was made and reaffirming like Haneke's beliefs in making a film like this.
Most people said that it was vapid and that it was just torture porn that indulged in violence.
Which is like which is like it.
But there were lots of reviews that recognized it for being a really powerful movie. I remember reading one that said that it was a game changer of cinema.
I agree.
So some critics obviously recognized its greatness even though it was the remake, but you know, I feel like overall the audience just wasn't really able to connect with it because they don't understand that movies can show them things that aren't directly being lionized by the filmmakers.
Well, and I just want to touch on the torture porn aspect of it a little bit because I'd like to compare it to two things that are overtly torture porn. Like, one, Saw, and two, Human Centipede are two overtly torture porn films. But the point of those films is that they're, one, trying to outdo the violence that they're doing, that they're putting into the film. But they're adamant about showing you every detail of that violence. Funny Games, the only bit of violence it shows is Peter getting shot, and then it's negated because the film is reversed.
Yeah. People also complained about it not being as hard-edged as other movies of the same genre that people said that it was a part of.
Which is really interesting because it's completely missing the point in terms of horror film commentary, like and violence and media commentary that Haneke was setting up. So, you know, Haneke, if you're listening, you're perfect.
I think the main thing to take away from all those different reviews at the time is just that people didn't really know what to make of it. Because I remember seeing that trailer in theaters for the remake, and it was nuts. I'd never seen a trailer like that where it just seemed so strange, you know? As a kid, I didn't really understand what was going on, but it was marketed in a way that made it seem like it was going to be a really crazy, horrific time.
Which is really interesting because then it just throws you something completely different to reflect on.
Thematically, I think it's really challenging and horrific, but it's just that it isn't overtly just trying to scare you. It's trying to make a commentary about culture.
Yeah, it's reflective, and it's. I mean, the horrifying element of it, it's connecting horror with something more than violence. You know, and that's really interesting. I love that. I love it a lot. Yeah. What do you think of Funny Games? Did you go watch it? Are you going to watch it? Do you think it sounds interesting? Like, do you think we did disservice to it in this discussion? What do you think about it?
comment below. Let me know.
Let us know. It's real good. It's perfect. The 1997 one at least.
Tell us what you think. It's perfect though.
Tell us what you think, but you're wrong if you say it's anything less than perfect. I'm just kidding. I love it.
I love you.
Well, I love you too. We love you, audience.
And you can find us as always at youtube.com/
Gentlemen prefer cinephiles.
instagram.com/
Gentlemen prefer cinephiles.
itunes.com
/ Gentlemen prefer cinephiles.
and Facebook.
Gentlemen for cinephiles. And yes, you heard right. We're on iTunes now. That was so loud. Okay, goodbye.
Have a movie time.